Hi there makers and bakers, today we're making a fancy frill cupcake. Start by working your fondant until soft and pliable. Roll your fondant out on corn flour until 3 to 4 mils thick. Remember not to turn your fondant over as we don't want corn flour on our presenting side. To use an impression mat, you need to take your fondant and flip it over so the bottom side is now facing up. Very gently roll your rolling pin over your fondant in a couple of different directions, but be very careful that you're not pressing too hard to distort the impression underneath. Very carefully fold back your impression mat and peel off your fondant to reveal your impression. Try not to pull on the fondant as this will distort the image. Taking your round cutter, find the area on your impression that you would like to cut out for the top of your cupcake. Sometimes it's easier to find marks on the impression that will help you to keep it symmetrical. Turn your fondant over and place a small amount of water on the back. Very gently turn your fondant over onto the top of your cupcake, being very careful not to press down the impression. Smooth the fondant by gently pressing into the edges, not rubbing your hands back and forth as this will ruin the impression. To begin our frill, we're going to take some fondant and work it until it's soft and pliable. We're now going to roll the fondant out on some corn flour to approximately 1 mil thick, or as thin as you can make it. We are wanting to create ribbons with our fondant, so you'll need to roll the fondant out to at least 15 centimeters in length. Using a sharp knife, we're going to cut 2 ribbon lengths out of our fondant. I'm using the edges, which is fine, even though it's not straight. That's what's going to give our frill some character when we roll it up. Place your fondant ribbon onto some foam matting. Using a balling tool, we're going to rub along the very edge of our ribbon to create our frill. This technique requires you to push down onto the fondant edge and pull the ball along the edge of the ribbon. You do need to apply pressure, however you don't want to break the fondant. If you're having any sticking issues, you can place some corn flour onto your balling tool before pulling it along the edge of the fondant. Place a tiny amount of water along the edge of the fondant that has not been frilled. Starting at one end of our ribbon, we're going to begin by tightly rolling the fondant. Roll your fondant for approximately 2 centimeters. Holding the rolled end in one hand, you are going to use the other hand to feed through the ribbon using a pinching motion and pressing into the rolled end. With your hand that's holding the rolled end, you're going to be pressing the bottom of the fondant in to help it to stick as it's going around. You're also going to be rotating this hand as you're holding the fondant all together and pressing in to keep the roll and the frill from separating. Set your frill aside to dry and create a second frill. Use a sharp knife to cut the bottom of your frill off so that it can sit nice and flat on the top of your cupcake. Use a small amount of royal icing to adhere the frill to the top of the cupcake. Continue this with however many frills you've made. Using royal icing and a number 2 piping tip, you're going to place piped dots around the base of the fondant. I've found an area on my pattern that's been repeated, so I'm using that to keep my dots symmetrical by placing them in the same spot each time. I'm now using some gold luster mixed with vodka to paint the very tips of my frills. Laying the paintbrush on its side and gently tapping on the edges is a really good technique to stop any of the gold from going further down into the frills. I'm also going to paint my tiny dots gold as well. Here is our finished frill cupcake. I hope you've enjoyed watching this tutorial.